Hey everyone, welcome to Playing with Plugins. I'm Jordan, a designer at Cash App. Sorry that I couldn't be there live with you all, but we'll have fun with this one either way. So, playing with plugins. One of the most frequently asked questions that I get all the time is, how did you end up in design? Because you're sharing all this code and you're building all this stuff and yeah, how did you end up in design? And just as much as I love to design, I also love to code, and it was, at a really young age that I sort of like got into coding as a thing, and especially when design and code come together as this um, thing that you can really leverage to build and uh, make a product, look great. Um, I love when it all comes together. And one of the earliest memories I have was on the internet stumbling upon Apple.com. I think this is in 2004, and just remembering how in awe I was of the design and the aesthetic. And at the time, I really knew nothing about design, but um, I just wanted to do everything I could to make this site my own and like edit the text and really try to understand how it was designed and made. And this was back during a time, a long time ago, where my design taste didn't always match my design skill. And while I was building, my ideas, I was able to make them function. They didn't look so great, back then, especially. And um, I really just took it upon myself to start designing what I was building. And that's really how I got into both design and code together. It was through a lot of iteration and working on side projects and random ideas that I really sharpened my design, skill set just by building stuff and really like doing the work, designing it and coding it. And that all kind of led up to where I am now with being a designer on the Cash team, and I get to work with an incredible team of designers and amazing people that put so much work into making what you see here. And we'll touch on a Cash App related um, plugin later on, but um, quick plug is that we are hiring, and there really is no place like Cash App, so you should join us if you're looking. So let's talk plugins. I really got my start in this whole plugin ecosystem and this idea of like third-party developers building stuff that others could use to empower their stuff through WordPress and blogs and PHP way back when. And over time, that evolved into the design tool, and Sketch had they had some hints of a plugin thing going on, and you could write scripts to automate stuff and build really cool stuff. And I definitely experimented a bunch there. But really, where I started to flourish was, just given what the Figma team and the community has done for plugins and developers building for designers in the design tool. It's really flourishing, and it allows you to really experiment and try things given the way they've set it up. And we'll really speak to that as we go. I love this idea of just being able to automate things that you traditionally use your mouse and your cursor for, or keyboard shortcuts, and things that maybe are tedious that you could convert into lines of code to just do for you in like, the snap of a finger. And I'm always thinking of like new plugin ideas, much like I'm always thinking of new ideas for apps and random stuff. Like I've got this long list of plugin ideas in this checklist form that I still have yet to get to, and just as much ideas that I have gotten around to and actually built as Figma plugins. And there's a lot of stuff in here. Feel free to steal whatever you see. But I recall one instance especially. I had this idea. I was literally like on the subway, and I just Figma dependency graph. Oh my God. What if you could like visualize your design system in this like graph form and like see what components depend on each other? And I just remember like typing some of the details and diagramming it. We'll touch on how this one works as well. This is what my Figma plugin development menu looks like. If you've got local plugins that you're working on, I've got a ton of stuff that I'm always experimenting with, and this is inside of that directory and Finder, just lots and lots of different ideas that I tinker with um, all the time related to Figma plugins. And the way I kind of got into it and got to the point where I could even publish a plugin on the community was starting really small and just learning how the Figma API and the plugin stuff works. And the first question I asked was like, how do you draw a rectangle on the canvas? And turns out there's like a two-liner that is basically an entire plugin that can just draw a rectangle. And the next question was like, how do you move that rectangle to a different position? And it's, hopefully this is straightforward, just, setting the X and Y positions of that rectangle to move it. And it was just lots of like, doing one thing, drawing a rectangle, figuring out how to reposition it, and learning and iterating that really over time built up and got me to the point where I could start experimenting with full-on ideas that you might have seen in the notes list. And here's a few quick experiments that I've ran that I'll kind of preview um, that I've done over time. The first one was called Time Machine. It was the first Figma plugin I published. It lets you save and organize work that you want to look back on. And the really quick example is it basically, you could imagine if you're like, let's call this our design that we're iterating on, and we want to play with the positioning. Maybe we want to play with it in the top right. This is a bad example, but you can run the Time Machine plugin on your selection, and it literally sends that instance of that design to a Time Machine page. And I can make another change, and over time you imagine I'm iterating and I want to save different versions to look back on, and it organizes your history by date and time, so you can see the evolution of a design as you're kind of designing it. Live preview was really cool. Basically, the idea being that let's say this is something I'm presenting in a design critique, and if I right click and run the live preview plugin, it tells me share copy link in the top right. So I'll do that and paste. And what this does is it generates a QR code for anyone. If I'm like presenting here, you could actually scan this. It'll lead to the prototype version of the presentation on your phone. It's great for like design critiques if you want to let others pull up your prototype just by scanning a QR code on their phone. Really simple. And it even evolved into an iOS app, and it lives on test flight at the moment. You can download it on Airport, and you can save your designs and prototypes for later to pull up whenever you want without having to be in front of your computer, which is really handy. Text edit was really fun. It basically just lets you edit all of the text layers in your file on the current page you're on in one place. And so if I run that one really quickly, basically this is just a UI that shows all the text layers on this page. And so let's say I wanted to make an edit to this one. I can just do that inline here, and it just syncs it up. It's really handy if I want to search for like every text layer that contains design and make changes. Super handy. Dependencies is also a really fun one. We touched on that that note that I had. And the example is if you've got a design system, and let's say you have this, you've got components, you've got a cell that contains other component instances. What if you could actually visualize your design system and how things depend on one another? And here's the example. Basically, you can see that this cell, component contains a button and an avatar. Both of those contain an icon, and that icon contains this check component. You can imagine for a much larger design system, really visualizing how things depend on one another. It could really come in handy. Genie is another really fun one that goes hand in hand with this component library example, where let's say that, I literally just had this idea. What if you could like sketch the really rough outlines of the components that live in your design system, like the general shapes of like an avatar and whatever, and make your selection on that frame and run Genie, and it just converts the your rough rectangle sketches into, your literal design system using the aspect ratio and trying to match what is most similar in size and shape to what you drew. That one's really experimental, but you can imagine being able to really quickly sketch, ideas and convert them into real components. Canvas was a another really fun one. I won't live preview in real time, but the idea being that um, I was building iOS apps and I was building Figma plugins, and like, what if the two came together and you could create an iOS app that literally interacts with the Figma canvas. This one was really, really fun to build, and um, lots more to experiment with here. But you can see how you can start to connect the dots between even different like platforms entirely and how they relate to Figma plugins. So there's a ton of more even more experiments that I ran that you can imagine. I've tinkered with as far as Figma plugins, and it was just through this process of really doing a ton of experimentation. Each experiment that I did lent itself to the next one, and I learned more and kind of built upon it, and just built up over time. And I want to touch on four experiments for plugins in particular that we'll go into some detail on, um, that are really special to me. One is one around saving time. One is one that you could use at work that we use at Cash App. One is really experimental, and one is GPT-3. So, saving time. If you're anything like me and you see this design on this Figma canvas, and you're looking at the X and Y position of this rectangle, and you just every part of you just wants to align that to 0, 0. Um, One thing I do, I don't know if anyone else joins me in this, I'll put those layers manually into a group and then align that group to 0, 0, and then ungroup those layers so that the canvas is back to normal and everything is just, aligned to X, 0, Y, 0. Um, um, you know, that's just me. But um, there's a lot of points and clicks and, stuff that's manual work. And as I was building Figma plugins and thinking about what I could build, uh, this was one that I do frequently that came to mind that I could automate and save time. And I have this utilities menu that has this align everything to 0, 0 plugin inside of it. And again, this idea of like saving and automating points and clicks and how that maps to code. And with each of these experiments, I tried to really break down how, at a high level, each one works in like 3 steps. And again, this is kind of the structure of the plugin code. It's what it's doing is it's placing every layer on the canvas into a group. It's then aligning that group to X0, Y0, and then it's ungrouping. It's doing exactly what I was doing manually, just in code. And it's just a really simple one that saves me some time. Let's talk about one that we use at work, and in particular at Cash App. And I don't think it's any secret that we don't have a dark mode publicly yet, but it is in the works. And um, there's a lot of nuances when it comes to designing a dark mode. There's these semantic color namings, and you have to convert things and deal with figuring out how you visually show like things that are elevated, and maintaining your light and dark mode colors. And there's a lot of manual work there. And your design system, your color styles might look a little something like this, where you've got that semantic naming convention of your light colors and then your dark mode colors using the same name. And you could imagine that if I've got this, dark mode screen that I jump over to, and I've already got my semantic colors added here, but if I wanted to convert this into light mode, the first thing I might do is switch this to the light background, and then select this text and make that the light label, and then select all the the keys and make that the light label. And you can imagine for a really complex screen that would take a long time and it's really tedious. And so the question was, what if you could take a screen that already has your semantic color styles added and run a plugin that automatically flips between light mode and dark mode, assuming you've got your color style set up. And so here's what that looks like. You make a selection on the screen you want to convert. We call the plugin lights, and in this case, I'm already in dark mode, the lights are off, and to go into light mode, I turn the lights on, and it just automatically flips into light mode. And so the kind of three-step breakdown of this one is that in the plugin code is it's iterating through each layer in the current selection. It's then finding each color style that matches the opposite mode. So if it's currently light/label, I want to find dark/label. And then it's, literally swapping the color style between light and dark mode. So just flipping, turning the lights on and off, basically. And this is a plugin that is live in the community, and you can install it under the Cash App community profile. So give it a try. Here's a more experimental plugin idea that I had, and I had a random thought. Sometimes you run across a design that you really like. Here's a random example, just like the iMessage app with the pinned, people, and you want to copy it. You just love it so much you want to copy it, and you'll like put the screenshot on the Figma canvas, and then you'll like try to line up the the shapes and try to get that right and duplicate, and then you got to do the fonts, you got to line that up, whatever. It's just a mess, right? It takes a lot of time. The question was, what if you could take a flat static image and turn that into interactive layers on the Figma canvas? And the first thing I thought of was OCR, these libraries that let you take an image and interpret the text on these layers, or also known as optical character recognition. And there's a really popular library called Tesseract that does this that I came across. I had never used it before, but I was curious how I could make this work. And I ran across this really great article, OCR in the browser with Tesseract.js, and it says optical character recognition is the process of converting images of text into machine encoded text. For example, you can take a picture of a book page and then run it through an OCR software to extract the text. This is exactly what I wanted to do. The other interesting thing was OCR in the browser in particular. You might think, how can you run a library that's meant for the browser as a Figma plugin? Well, it turns out that Figma plugins, the way they were built was that they're just little websites, and you can actually make this work. You can pull in the Tesseract JavaScript library and actually pull this off. And here's a really fun live example where I'll open the console so you can actually see the plugin doing work. Basically, I have an image, it's a flat, static image, and I can run the screenshot, if I can find it, the screenshot plugin. And what it's doing is it's sending it to Tesseract. Tesseract is interpreting the layout, and then the plugin code is doing some interpretation as well. And it just literally outputs everything that it recognized in the image as shapes and text onto the Figma canvas. It's really cool to flip back and forth between the output and the input image to see, how magical it is. And so how does this work? Well, it turns out that Tesseract is actually giving you back the X and Y positions of text layers and the contents of the text and different objects that it picks up. And it's literally telling you where they're placed within the frame of the image. And so you could imagine that sending that to plugin code looks a little bit like this. You send the image that's on the Figma canvas to that Tesseract library. You interpret that structured, JSON response for all the objects that were on the canvas, and then you place those objects on the canvas, whether it's text or shapes, and that's how you get that output. The last but not least thing to share is GPT-3. This one's really exciting. I had a random question, like, what if you could talk to your design tool? What if you could say, like, draw a rectangle, and it drew a rectangle? And remember back to that example where that was kind of the first thing I learned was like, how do you create a plugin that draws a rectangle, right? So using this example, a plugin that I experimented with a long time ago was called Assistant, and you could literally tell it draw a rectangle, and it would do that. Or you could say add a red triangle 320, and it would do that with the sizing and the color and everything. And it was really, really simple, and these are some of the examples you could give it. And that's where I got my start with tinkering with sending natural language to a design tool and actually outputting something. What if you took that a step further and described like literally an entire app? How would that work? You might have seen this tweet of mine that shared a demo of sending that exact text to a plugin and having it output, the literal design of an app. And the way this works is through OpenAI. They make this machine learning model called GPT-3. That's what the OpenAI API uses. And simply the API takes any text prompt and attempts to match the pattern that you give it. And so if we take this literal example, an app that has a navigation bar, some icons and a photo feed and some other icons. So if I copy and paste that and run this demo in real time, it's called Designer. I paste that. It's sending this off to GPT-3. GPT-3 is interpreting what I meant based on what I trained it to understand. And it's outputting, a real design on the canvas from just describing what an app looks like. So how does this one actually work? Well, it turns out that OpenAI has this playground that you can use to train inputs and outputs. So you can see I have defined here a JSON dictionary for an app that prompt that I gave it, and then it gives me back some JSON looking code. And this is really important because this JSON code is this structured stuff that I can actually use to send to the Figma plugin to interpret and understand exactly what I need to draw and how I need to draw it. And so if we break this down a little further, we see, this navigation piece. It's got this icon, this title, another icon. If we have a design system that, is a navigation bar and it knows that it takes two icons and a title, we can, interpret that in our plugin code and understand we should be using this component for this particular, navigation piece. The same thing is true for photos. If we have a photo card that takes an icon, a photo, etc., we know how to lay these things out and we can translate that into literal plugin code. And so what's happening here is we're sending that raw text input to the OpenAI API for GPT-3 to understand. Once we get that JSON response back, we're interpreting the response that is that mini representation of the Figma canvas. And then we're laying out the canvas based on that JSON response and actually drawing the icons from a library and adding components and whatnot. And just imagine, what does this mean for design automation? What does this mean for accessibility? And you can imagine all the possibilities just being able to say what you want to be designed. So we talked a little bit about, design and code and this marriage and how I kind of got into this whole thing and the process of learning and starting really small and experimenting a bunch. And that's what led me to really this whole idea of playing with plugins and just iterating. And there's this theme of doing things over and over to learn and bring to the next thing and get really advanced. We showed a wide range of really simple saving time plugins to really advanced, really futuristic stuff. So What will you make? Thank you.